And welcome back, y'all, to Let's Talk About It, Clark. I'm Chad.
I'm Tiffany.
And we are going to get into a subject that we had brought up in the last video. It was about Jonny Gosch, and some people had asked, why can't Jonny come home? We had gone over some other things in the video as well, but seeing as y'all had an interest in this one in particular, and we thought it was a great idea to get into it because this is actually the one that got Tiffany involved in the true crime genre, if you will, to begin with. She has been researching it off and on for a lot of years and has spent a lot of time on it, and something that just really spoke to her and had a big impact on how she viewed the world. And still does. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Tiff.
And we will get into it. I just wanted to address some of the comments. We read them all. We laughed at a lot of them. We enjoyed each and every one of them.
Like the one about the country Matt and Charlize.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Appreciate that. I have told him all his life since I've known him. He was like Matt Damon.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of people say John Cena. I don't see that. But
no.
We did, we took a lot of things to heart and tried to work on them. The audio and background noises.
Yeah, we got a microphone now. Yeah.
And, like someone commented that these topics aren't funny. They're not entertaining. And we don't think they're funny either. It's just something that we have to say as a disclaimer that, it's all for entertainment purposes only and that everything's alleged or bad things could happen to us because of what we say about our opinions. And then also they said, if we're doing true crime, do true crime. Don't get political. And we will try to do that. We will try to, stay on topic and not be scatterbrained. And this case, I don't know if I'll be able to do that. It's a lot of it, but I'll try my best. And, I've been with Chad for 23 years now, and Chad is just Chad. He is unapologetically himself. And 80% of the time, that's what I respect about him. That's why we get along so well, I guess. Opposites attract. Chad is going to say what he means and mean what he says. And, I'm going to be the one that's apologizing for us both way too much.
Literally, if I see a connection between one thing and another, I'm going to bring it up. It's not about trying to push my view on anyone. It is has a lot to do with the facts that I keep stored in my brain, and like I said, if I see a connection between one and the other, I will mention it. We will not go off on a tangent. Like I said, I'm with you to the point that I'm tired of seeing politics completely and utterly immersing everything else. And so, like I said, I get you, and we will try not to make that our whole thing. But again, if I do see it, because my motto is, I say what I say and let the chips fall where they may. And I don't do it in a disrespectful manner. I'm really big on respect, and showing people the respect that they deserve until it's proven that they deserve otherwise. And it's just how I feel about it. So,
with that said, we'll just jump right in to why Jonny couldn't come home. I did many years ago, I guess it was back in 2005, 2006, I picked up a book in the back of a bookstore that was on consignment for 50 cents. And it was Jonny Gosch's book of Why Jonny Can't Come Home, and I should have held on to it because they go for about $90 to $100 now.
What a return on your investment.
Back in the day, I had a rule: if I read a book, I would just leave that book at some random spot so someone else could enjoy it. So
then we used to do a lot of traveling back in that time, and we would leave a lot of them at hotels, and especially was the country inn suites.
Yep.
We like to stay in those because they had the little library nook, and Tiffany was just devouring books left and right. And something I never really got into was reading, long books. I'd rather watch the video or the cliff notes, so to give me the highlights. And but anyway, that's one thing that I've always admired about her is the fact that she'd sit down and just devour a book in an afternoon and retain a lot of it.
Noreen was very detailed in her book. She included photos. She didn't hold back. What she felt, she put in that book, and with no fear. And I'm going to try to do that here today. There will be things that we can't say that is tied to this case, and it's a huge rabbit hole that we're fixing to go down.
And there will be some graphic details that we will leave out for other obvious reasons. Like I said, that's not something we're trying to push. It's a bunch of, gore and trying to keep this as unemotional as we can. So, like I said, a lot of times showing those things just, it triggers people.
Some of if it doesn't trigger you, and it's, I have seen the photos from the book. I've seen a lot of the photos from the case, and they are triggering. We can put
those links in the description, like I said, so that you guys can look at them if you want to. But again, to plaster them on the screen just really isn't suiting our purpose here today. So,
but back in September of 1982, on the 3rd, the Gosch family went to a football game where Noreen would later recall seeing Jonny talking to a police officer. For a lot of the times, they would look over and he would be at the concession stand, or they would look back over and he would be at the bathroom. So John Sr. would go and get him to come and sit with them, spend time with them. And again, he would work his way back over to that police officer. The last time that they would find him, he would be under the bleachers with this police officer.
Which is a little weird.
It is. And Noreen looks back at that time now and questions why that happened. But that night, she didn't really question it a whole lot. I mean, it kind of triggered her a bit too. But not to the point that she questioned Jonny on it and what they were talking about. The next day, on the 4th, Noreen would go on to later call that the last good day. Their sister had come home. Jonny's sister had come home from college with her boyfriend, and their older son was at home, and they just spent a great day getting to be family together. Later that night, Noreen would go on to tell in her book that Jonny asked if he could do his paper route by himself, and that was something that they had not agreed to, and that's what she told him. It was a hard no.
He wanted to fly solo.
He did.
And she said, "Oh no."
He said a lot of the older boys are doing it, and even some of the ones that are my age.
Did she give him the age on if all of your friends jumped off a bridge? Did she?
Oh no, she didn't. No? She didn't put it in the book if she did. She just said, in the book that they had their brothers with them, or they had somebody of the family that was with them, or a friend that was older that was doing the route with them. And she said it's just too dark. It's just too much.
Those things have to be started like way early in the morning. Because a lot of people want to read their paper as soon as they get out of the bed, while they're drinking their coffee. And so, plus, most of the days they have school to get to.
But it was a hard no. He didn't like it, but he, later on he tells her good night. He loves her, goes to bed. And Noreen says the next thing at around 1:30 in the morning, they received a telephone call that John Sr. answers, and she recalls him saying, "All right." "Yes." "All right." "Okay." And then he hangs up and she says, "Who's that?" And he said, "Just wrong number again," which, again, afterwards hit her funny. But at the moment, they had been getting these weird phone calls from wrong numbers just about every Sunday. Not necessarily at 1:30 in the morning, but they were getting those wrong calls just about every Sunday. They would go on to sleep, think nothing of it, until the phone starts ringing again, and they're saying that the papers weren't delivered. So John gets up, he's hurrying about, he knows they're behind at this point. He's just going to go get Jonny, and they'll get caught up. And they go up to get Jonny. Johnny's not there. Later, they would be told by the next door neighbor that he heard Jonny, because Johnny's wagon that he would pull behind him with the papers, or to go pick the papers up, had a squeaky wheel, and he heard him coming across his yard around 5:30 in the morning. So John says, "You stay here, you cook, you get everything ready for when we go to the lake later today, and I'll just go find Jonny." Obviously, he didn't listen. He struck out on his own. John would come back later to tell Noreen that he didn't find Johnny. All they found was the wagon with the papers in it that had never been unbundled, and that he found the family dog with the wagon. He told Noreen to call 911, and that because they were getting so many calls that people didn't get the newspaper, he would go and he would catch the route up, get everybody their papers, and he would look for Johnny along the way. Noreen did call 911. It would take the police officer 45 minutes to arrive to their house, which was only 10 miles from the police station. But Noreen, being Noreen, in that 45 minutes, she has called the newspaper manager. She has found out the numbers for the people, or the boys mainly, that were there the morning. As they would do the route, they would leave, go down the road to the church, and gather up all of the newspapers that would need to be delivered that day.
So that's where the newspaper company dropped them off, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And there were several boys and a older gentleman, John Rossi, who was an attorney who had been there that morning, who was also picking up papers for routes. The two boys had talked to Johnny. Not a very long conversation with him and Mr. Rossi, but everyone recalled seeing Johnny being approached by a man in a two-tone blue Ford Fairmont. At first, when the guy was approaching Johnny, he was calling out to him to try to get his attention. Johnny was ignoring him. But when he got further up and he got closer to the boys where they were folding their papers, he did stop, and the man asked him for directions, and Johnny said, "I don't know where that's at." The guy would leave. He turned around, he came back, he parked, he opens the door, he has his feet on the curb, and he's talking to Johnny and asking him again for these directions. When Johnny looks over to Mr. Rossi, when he comes...
Johnny told him he doesn't know where it's at first,
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So it seems like he was up to something, got cold feet, decided to dip, and then come back for a second go.
Well, Johnny sees Mr. Rossi, and he calls out to him and says, "Hey, can you help him?" And as Mr. Rossi's coming over to try to figure out what the guy needs, Johnny says to one of the guys that's there, who's 16 years old, that would tell Noreen, it just makes me feel weird. I'm going to go home and get my parents and let them finish my route with me. So Johnny leaves, and when the guy mumbles something to Mr. Rossi that was not really intelligible, and he takes off. He does a U-turn and gets out of there. They said that the car could be seen kind of following Johnny out after he clicked on the dome light 3 times on and off. The 16-year-old that Johnny had been talking to said that when the fellow in the car had clicked that dome light 3 times, he seen another guy walk out between 2 houses. It was a tall, slender man, and he stayed behind Johnny but was following Johnny. Why nobody decided to follow Johnny, Mr. Rossi, any of the other boys, I don't know. There's so many things about this case that didn't make sense to me.
A lot of times people, if it's not a glaring problem, big flashing neon signs, they say, well, that's kind of odd, and then they just kind of go on. And it's always in hindsight, they look at these things and are like, that's where it went wrong right there, And so that's got to be one of the most frustrating things.
Yeah. Mark was the 16-year-old, and he kind of alluded to that when he said, he watched the guy go around the corner. Johnny takes the left turn going towards home, and then the guy goes around that left corner going towards Johnny's home, and they hear a car door slam and some tires screech. And that would be the last thing that anybody ever heard of Johnny for quite a while. But Noreen has gathered all of this information in that 45 minutes. When the police come, she gives them all of these statements, has, all these names. She has a description of the guy that was in the car. She has a description of the car. And Mr. Rossi has even remembered half of the license plate. The police at that time said, well, how many more times has Johnny ran away before this? Noreen said, what do you mean? He's never ran away. This isn't a runaway. He's been kidnapped. There's no way around it. And
right. You have people following the boy, for God's sake.
She's very upset. She's very animate. But this was in the 80s. This was before a lot of things would come into play. And at this moment, it's 48 to 72 hours for a runaway. It's
Then
48
I
to
think they were
72
living
hours for
in
anyone.
a state of denial at that point.
I
A
guess.
lot of
But that rule would not change until Noreen, with this case, pushed and had the Jonny Gosch bill pushed, which means the police would then have to start looking for any missing child, no matter what the reason, immediately.
well, then they later came out to say we've all seen the TV show, the first 48, where that is the window that is going to give you your most leads, your best chance of solving the case is in the first 48 hours. Everybody is, still in the same places, and remember their statements a whole lot better,
Right.
so forth, so on. It's completely asinine.
Well, usually if you're going to find them, you're going to find them in the first 48. If not, it starts to dwindle. But Noreen would push for that. She would get that into legislation. She would get that bill passed, and she would also go on to start other things that would help with children. Not only to try to help Jonny, but to help other children who were missing. But during this time, they're not looking for Jonny. They have deemed him a runaway. Because he's a runaway, they're not going to look for him till 48 to 72 hours have passed. So Noreen,
And he's obviously not 18.
no,
So laws now are they will go and get the child, no matter where he or she is at, if they're not 18. Wow.
But so Noreen, being Noreen again, she forms her own search party. She has around 1,000 people who have come out to search high and low for Jonny because she knows he's not running away.
Yeah.
Something's the matter. They need to be out there looking for him and finding what they can find. Even at that, the police chief comes to where they're searching in one of the local parks, climbs up onto a picnic bench, uses his horn to bullhorn to tell everybody, disperse, go home. This is just a runaway case. These people come back to Noreen and they're like, I thought you needed help. It's just a runaway. And she's like, he's not. And I don't know why they're saying that. I don't know what's going on. And she just keeps hitting up against every wall they can think to throw at her. At that time, she hired a private investigator. The private investigator came in and he was gathering some pretty good information. There was a neighbor who said that a couple of hours after Jonny would have been missing, and this is a couple of days in at this point, when they're talking to this neighbor, the private investigator, he said that, looking back, in hindsight, he's seen a car parked outside. Then a blue van pulls up beside that car. And the car transfers something that looks like either a rolled up tarp or a rolled up blanket, but it was pretty lengthy, to this van, and the van tears off out of the neighborhood. This was a couple of blocks away, though. So at first he wasn't really putting those things together. He wasn't thinking anything about it. Later he would start to think, was that Jonny? Was something weird there? Because it kind of sounded like that Ford Fairmont. But as the private investigator is, making his rounds and he's, kind of scoping out the neighborhood, he wanted to be out there in the morning to see how the boys were interacting, what routes they were taking. Was anybody out there watching them? He would be arrested for flagrant. He would be arrested by the police chief and told he can't be doing what he was doing. Noreen does make herself known very clear to the police department that they are to leave her private investigator alone. If they don't want to help her, they can at least leave the private investigator alone.
Right.
And
if you ain't going to help, certainly don't hurt.
Thankfully, they do. They back off of the private investigator, and he is able to get a lot of information for her. It's not information that she wants to hear. Definitely not. And then in this rock zone, Jonny, they do eventually bring her on TV. They do a press release. They act like they're looking for Jonny, questioning the people that were witnesses. But one of the witnesses' mom, one of the young boys that was there that day, said that when the police came to question her son, They didn't bring in a tape recorder. They didn't even bring in a pen and a paper to take down any of the information that was given to them.
So they're just going through the actions at this point.
Their actions. And they would continue to tell her that they still thought Jonny was a runaway. They didn't put a lot of time and effort into it. And mostly everything that was done, every attempt that was made to be on TV, Noreen pursued those avenues herself. And, she doesn't come off as a very emotional person. She's not sad and crying in these videos. She is pleading for her son. She's mad, and you can tell she's mad. There's anger there for them taking Jonny. There's anger there for them not helping her.
Along with a buttload of frustration.
But she gets fried by the people that watch what's happening. They call her calloused. They start to believe she may have been in on it because she's not emotional. And the FBI comes out to say that they're just loons. They're just crazy. He's a runaway, and they're just being crazy.
They're just making a mountain out of a molehill.
Noreen would really have to fight against everybody because a lot of people would go on to say she's crazy because of how this case turns out.
There were so many things that she got changed.
She did.
What are some of them? I know we talked about some of them.
Like I said, she got into legislation, the Jonny Gosch bill, which they have to immediately start looking for children now. That's why we got that. She did help to start up the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. There's another case that we may cover. It kind of is tied to Delphi. It has so many similarities to Delphi. It's the Evansdale murders. Noreen goes out of her way in 2013. From 1982, when her child is missing, all the way to 2013, she's still fighting. She shows up in Evansville when these two girls are murdered, and she tells the family, "What can I do? She's
here. She's a woman on a mission.
I am at your disposal. It does not matter what you need. I'm here. Let's run it."
With her wealth of knowledge and experience, that would be the ally to have if you're in a situation like that.
Now, at this point, those girls were just missing. Later on, very quickly, they would come to find out that those girls had met their demise. And at that point, just in true Noreen fashion, she shifts gears and she says, well, let's get the death penalty. We'll find them, and we're going to push for the death penalty. So even still, Noreen is pushing agendas. She is making moves, and she's still trying. She's out there. She's getting kids.
I salute your perseverance, ma'am.
Absolutely. But later on, in 1983, there would be a report in Oklahoma that a lady calls in and says that she's out shopping and she sees a young boy running towards her, being chased by two men, and he tells her, "Ma'am, I've been kidnapped and my name is Jonny David Gosch. Please help me." She does. She goes to the police. She tells them what she has seen, what she has encountered, what she's heard. The police in Oklahoma, not knowing very much about what's going on in Iowa, says, it's probably just a family thing. It was probably just a kid. He was upset with his parents. Don't worry about it.
Wow.
Later on in the years, she would see a commercial that Noreen had put together for a hotline with the number and the picture of Jonny Gosch, and she would say, "That's him." And when
that's the young man that ran up to me begging for help with two men chasing him.
And this gets called into the hotline, and it's verified. When she describes the young boy that she's seen, it fits the description of Jonny. There's some things on Jonny that were very noticeable. He had some birthmarks on his chest that were very visible, even with his shirt on, and she called that right out. So it was verified that it probably was Jonny. In 1984, another young boy would come up missing who was running a paper route. His name was Eugene Martin. He was missing at between 5 and 6:30 a.m. He was running a paper route in Iowa, in Des Moines, and nothing's done. It's almost...
Same MO, same everything. And
he's a runaway.
He's a damn runaway.
And these things would rock on that are happening like this. They don't help Noreen very much, like I said. Another child would come up missing, Mark Allen, in 1986. Mark Allen comes up missing in 1986, and I think it is at that point that they start to truly try to make some strides and some breakthroughs. That's when she's got some of these legislations in order. But in
Well, Johnny and the other kid were the first ones to ever be put on milk cartons. And I don't know how many of you remember that, but back in the day before there was internet and we all had a phone stuck in our face, the morning we'd be spent eating your cereal, looking at the back of the cereal box, and also the milk carton, which happened to be out there as well. So, and those things got a lot of, like on the back of the cereal box, there'd be a lot of games, crosswords, search and finds and things like that. And, obviously on the milk cartons, we had, the pictures of the missing children. So
because Maureen called up the local milk company and asked, could we do this? And so, yeah, Johnny was one of the first ones. There was a girl that was missing, and then Eugene Martin would go on to be, I think, the third person in line to be on these milk cartons. And thousands of them. I remember them even when I was a kid being on there. But then they get a really weird turn in the case. In 1985, a lady calls the police department and says that while shopping, she got change back that included $1, and printed on it was, "I am alive, Jonny Gosch." A handwriting specialist would inspect it and say, yeah,
wow,
truly seems to be his handwriting. And Noreen had been telling them, this is his handwriting, this is my child.
He's still alive.
He's still alive.
Guys, come on, let's do something about
No
this.
press
He's doing everything that he can on his side. She's doing everything that that's just
So this dollar bill issue comes out. They did a small press release, but she has to call up like Geraldo Rivera, Sally Jesse Raphael. She's going on all these talk shows. She's calling them and she's begging them, like, let me come on, talk. And Geraldo brought her on several times. There were psychics that was on there. Weird coincidence with that is that she's on the Geraldo Rivera show with those psychics who's telling her, we're going to lead you to Johnny. We're going to help you find him. And Noreen would go on to say, even in the book, I really didn't believe in it. I had my fair share of skepticism, but one of them came to her off air and said, very soon you're going to meet a guy. It's going to be weird, but he's going to be telling the truth, and he's going to try to lead you to Johnny. And it may even end up with you seeing Johnny. And Noreen was very taken aback by that, because at that moment, only Noreen knew that there was a Paul Benassi who had been arrested, and he was asking to talk to her in relation to Johnny coming up missing. No one else knew that information. Which leads,
he had reached out directly to her.
Well, he had reached out to her through the guy who was writing a book for him.
Okay.
There was the Franklin scandal, which happened from the Franklin Credit Union. $40 million had been embezzled from Lawrence Larry King Jr. And through this embezzlement and through this investigation, it would go on to be uncovered that Mr. King was running a not so great ring that involved children and the harm of those children. Paul was one of those children. He had grown up in this ring and had been used for just terrible purposes. And when the Franklin scandal gets uncovered, which another huge rabbit hole that is connected to higher up, political people, police officers, and what would go on to be alleged presidents, governors, mayors. Supposedly, Mr. King has these children that he has taken from the Boys and Girls Club, but mostly the Boys Club, and he is using these children for his own financial gain in this sickest way possible. But Paul gets charged. Through this investigation, they find Paul and they get him for CSAM. And he admits, yeah, I did it. That's what they took me when I was 6 years old, and that's what they've been using me for all these years, and I did that.
So they groomed him, raised him up to be a
kidnapping
bad
person. that harm children in really bad ways.
And teaching him to groom other children,
children.
for these bullshit purposes.
But as John DeCamp is writing the book about the Franklin cover-up, he hears a portion of Paul's testimony about a boy who was kidnapped one September morning in 1982 in Des Moines, Iowa. He contacts Maureen and he says, I really think you want to come in and just at least hear what he has to say. And there's so many things that had happened to John and Noreen in this time. They were defrauded so many times. People would call them and say, like the psychics, if you pay me X amount of dollars, we could go find him. And one person really did take them for a lot of money. They pretended to be a detective and they really did a number on them.
That's just as bad as those people going down to hurricane-torn areas and getting money for, but so much worse.
Yeah.
So much worse.
So much worse. They exploited her grief.
If you do something like that.
I don't know. But she eventually does break down and she goes to meet with Mr. DeCamp first. And this plays back to that phone call on 9/4 or 9/5 at 1:30 a.m. when John answers the phone and he says, yes, all right, okay. When she goes to meet with Mr. DeCamp, he shakes hands with her and he says, it's great seeing you again, and just carries on with the conversation. And Noreen says, but I've never seen you. I've never met you.
You've never met?
He said, yes, you did. Back in whenever it was, it was either 1989 or 1990 when Paul's arrested. And when he first hears of what Paul has to say, he brings them in. He thinks. He says, you and your husband came in. You talked to Paul. And she said, no, I didn't. So Mr. DeCamp, he brings in his secretary. She takes one look at Noreen and she says, well, your husband was here. But you look like her, but you're not the lady that was with her. And she said, excuse me?
Holy shit.
She goes on to show the handwriting that day from where they signed in, where the lady signed in as Noreen. That's a big rabbit hole that she went down there. In the book, she includes a picture of this lady, and she does look like Noreen. When John is asked why he did that, he gives no explanation, but he does admit that he went. And he did talk to Paul.
So he finds someone to impersonate his wife to go down to the police station.
Well, to meet with Mr. DeCamp, and then go to talk to Paul.
Wow.
And when he's there, he tells Mr. DeCamp and some of the police station workers to not call the home directly. There's so many media that is calling the home directly. They may miss a call from them to call this certain number that he gives to them, which Noreen's never seen before, if they want to talk about the case. She would go on to question John about this many times, and he would tell her it didn't happen. When he was questioned by Mr. DeCamp in an interview, he has to admit that it happened, but he says the lady wasn't there, that he came along to protect Noreen. They would go on to divorce in 1993 because Noreen never would stop suspecting him. After the phone calls and some other things, she never would stop suspecting that he played a hand in Johnny coming up missing. I think Noreen felt like between the police officer, the telephone call, and Johnny, who had never disobeyed her in the way that he disobeyed her by going on that route alone, that her husband gave him the go-ahead.
Well, God bless her. She's out there on an island by herself. The only other person on God's green earth that should have been as invested in it as she was her husband. Literally the father, the protector,
But it was at this time that Noreen would really start to question, why didn't he get up at 5 a.m. that morning? Why wasn't he ready? Why did he sleep in? I mean, even if he wasn't involved, from the moment they told her that he came down there, they planted that seed, and even if he didn't do it, she would never stop questioning it. She would never get over it. There would be too much in her brain.
But there was evidence. There was evidence. Literally signing in. His name in his handwriting, her name in somebody else's handwriting.
She had a picture of her.
Pictures.
The lady admitted it. Noreen called the phone number. The lady admits to it. She said that
But it didn't happen.
She said she didn't know why. She didn't
Shaggy
understand
said it wasn't me.
why she had to go there, why she had to play the part she played, but she got paid. She wouldn't include the lady's name because she had not passed yet, but she didn't. The lady gave her permission to include her photo in the book. So it was just, there's so many twists and turns and rabbit holes in this case as well. We can't really explore them all because we just wouldn't have enough time. Between the Franklin cover up, where the Franklin cover up leads to with Paul, and then Paul says that the reason he gets into all of these things is because it's a government program that got him to where he's at. A government program, mind you, that Bill Clinton would later in years give restitution for those who was part of it. It was a real program.
MK Ultra?
Paul Benassi was arrested, like we said, and he was a guy who suffered from DID. He had dissociative disorder, which is also known as multiple personality disorder. He claims he got that because he was part of the MK Ultra program, that he had been tortured, violated, and done in so many terrible ways. And he would go on to tell Noreen things about the morning that Johnny came up missing that nobody should have known. When the guy had told the investigator that, he sees this interaction between the car and the van, Johnny doesn't know that. Noreen didn't report that to anybody. She documented it with her investigator and did not give that information to anyone else. Paul verifies that without ever knowing that they knew that. He said, we pulled up in a van, took him out of the Ford. We then leave with him to Sioux City in Iowa, where we keep him for a short amount of time. He talks about how he lured Johnny to the car. After they couldn't get him to come over to the car to talk about the directions, everything else, they shift directions and get Paul to lure him over. At that time, Paul chloroforms him.
And we talk about that before in some of our other videos where the officers will hold back certain information from the public to sort of validate people when they come forward. If they happen to know these details that they have not shared, it lends validity to their statements, and if they have those, then they have inside information. And obviously if they are admitting to the crime and they have these, slam dunk at that point. I mean,
Noreen said that, the entire public knew that Johnny had a birthmark on his chest, but no one knew that he had a scar on his ankle. No one knew that he had a scar where he had burned his tongue in a U shape. No one knew that when he got, not many people knew, that when he got frustrated or scared, he would stutter. Paul Benassi would go on to tell her all of those things. He would go on to tell her that her son was being used in a human trafficking ring for the same purposes that he was being used, but that yes, he was still alive. He told her that once they left Sioux City, they were then taken to Colorado, where they were then used in the Franklin scandal and flown all around the United States of America, delivered to political people, delivered to mayors, delivered to police officers, and he even names the police officer, the chief of police, who was the chief of police at that time over Des Moines, Iowa.
The one that absolutely refused to investigate the case, or refused to let anyone else investigate the case, because I'm sure that wasn't his job specifically.
He was best friends with the police chief over Nebraska, where the Franklin cover-up's going on, and they are both named at being at one of these parties for the ring.
There's no excuse.
Noreen would later in years, I said, write the book, and she includes photos that get sent to her of her own child who is bound and gagged and has terrible things done to him. These people were torturing her. They knew that she was out there, and with every photo, with every letter, they would let Johnny write her a letter and say, I'm Johnny, I'm alive, all this is going on, but I'm alive.
And the bad thing is that, again, she's out here on this island by herself, and there's no worse feeling in the world, I would assume, than knowing that your child is out there being harmed and you can't do anything about it. Like your hands are just completely tied. You have put every resource that you have into it, but you're being thwarted at every turn simply for these depraved lunatics.
Well, Noreen would go on right before about 2 years before the Franklin scandal really blew up. She found an article about two girls over in Nebraska. And she's telling them, I think this is tied to my son and his disappearance. And I think this is like huge. I think this is a lot of people and they're kidnapping a lot of kids. And I think this all ties together. But of course, she's taking this information to that chief of police. And he looks at her and says, I don't have a feel for that. I don't do anything with it. She takes it to the FBI, and the FBI has been told by this chief of police, there's nothing to it. She's crazy. So the more that gets sent to her, letters, dollars, pictures, she's showing it. She's giving this information to as many people as she can give it to. She begins to look like a crazy conspiracy theorist. And they paint her in that light.
That is their MO.
Oh, they paint her pretty well in that light. But, as they can't take Paul's word, everything that Paul has told them, he's multiple personality disorder. He can't be trusted. Everything he's saying is just craziness because he's crazy.
That's bullcrap. If it doesn't matter which one of his personalities is responsible for it, Again, if he has those details, crazy people obviously commit crimes as well. Come on, people.
Well, Noreen would go on to say that each time Paul told his story, he called up the same personality. It's a 15-year-old boy, which that's how old Paul would have been at the time. And his story never changed once. She said, I would question him for years to come. I would word things in one way and then word it purposely in a different way the next time just to see if I could catch him up. She said I would ask him crazy questions that didn't have anything to do with the case just to see what he would say, and he'd say, I don't know about that. But he would stick to the straight answers he had given every time.
Yeah, so obviously he wasn't making things up. If he did, then if he was just trying to spin a yarn to entertain himself or to drag them down some deranged rabbit hole, whatever, that would have been the perfect opportunity for him to, throw some bullcrap in there. But the fact that he was sticking to the same story with, just the facts, ma'am, that's, wow. I mean, that's
and at his own detriment, because Paul, he's in jail. He's not asking for a plea deal. He's not asking for money. He's not asking for anything at this point. He just wants it off of his conscience. He just wants to tell her he's sorry and that Johnny's alive. I don't know where he's at now, but I know Johnny's alive. He goes on to, get out of jail. 80 people that were either reporting on, investigating, or who were victims of the Franklin scandal ended up either overdosed or had self-unalived in 5 years of it being blown open. And Paul sees this.
How convenient.
Paul sees this, but he continues to press on. America's Most Wanted, John Walsh, he decides, you know what? After hearing it, I'm going to go and investigate it. I'm going to go and I'm going to meet Noreen. I'm going to see what I can find out about what happened to Johnny. He meets with Paul. Paul takes him to the house in Colorado. And in the house in Colorado, when Paul finally gets to the point where he's over being emotional and traumatized and triggered by being there, they go into the home. Paul takes them directly downstairs into the basement, into a dugout area of tunnels, which had wooden caged off areas where several of the boys that were missing's initials had been carved into wood.
Wow.
And he said this is where they took them all. This is where a lot of the parties would happen. This is where a lot of the transactions would go down. But this is definitely where they would groom the children, torture the children, and get the children into the mindset of this is your life now.
Wow.
It is really sad
And if Paul was lying, if this was an elaborate hoax for him and just something to pass the time and he was deranged, he had a lot of information he shouldn't have had, and he played it well. He played it well. I mean, he would have had to go over there, carve those names, come up with all of this stuff. I mean, it would have been a lot of time and effort put in to just carrying out this act. And I just don't.
But he was
don't
locked
see it.
up during this time.
For
right?
a lot of it, he was locked up. But when he was on the show for America's Most Wanted, he was already released.
So this lady has gone through her child missing, through this guy being free and doing all these things to these kids, to being caught, to serving his sentence and getting out, and still.
Which Noreen forgave Paul. She looked at him and seen him for who he was, a broken and damaged child that disassociated just to get through what he went through, who had extreme remorse for what had happened not only to himself but every child that he was told, you have to take them. You're going to take them. Which, I mean, if you ever I watched that movie. All I know is My Name is Stephen long before I read Why Johnny Can't Come Home. And it was the same thing. He was taken when he was a small child. It was a true story. And the guy would make him go and kidnap other kids till he was 16 years old when he told the young boy that he's about to kidnap. He says, he takes him, he get back home, and he looks at the child and he just keeps looking at him and he says, we're leaving. And he takes him to the police department and he tells them of at least 9 children that he had helped to kidnap over the span of him being kidnapped from the time he was 6 out of his front yard. And they asked him, well, what's your name? And he said, I don't know. All I remember is my name's Stephen. He couldn't even remember his own last name.
He had been put through so much and conditioned so thoroughly that he couldn't even remember his own last name.
But that wouldn't be the last turn.
And had to compartmentalize these different people to deal with these different situations just to keep his mind from breaking.
Well, that is exactly what happens most of the time with disassociation. The mind literally compartmentalizes and breaks so that it can protect itself from melting down. There's no other way to get through it. I've got to be somewhere else. I'm going to protect the real me and let this person deal with it.
And literally say that this happened to this personality, which they honestly believe is a different person.
Well, for Paul, they weren't necessarily different people. They were just different. He gave different points in his life a voice and an age, a name.
So that
15-year-old Paul was Mark. 20-year-old Paul is Mike. I can't remember. I know 15-year-old Paul was Mark. So to deal with it, he gives it a name and he gives it a timeline, and he puts Paul in a pocket and protects him and lets Mark and Mike be responsible for that action.
It's just heartbreaking to think of this happening to one of my children. I mean,
heartbreaking.
Everything for 40 square blocks would just be melted.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
but that wasn't the last thing that would hit Noreen, nor would it be the last turn in her journey with what had happened that day. In 1997, 2:30 in the morning, one March morning, someone is banging at her door. They just keep banging, and she says, okay, I'm divorced and I'm alone. Someone's beating on the door at 2:30 in the morning. She was hesitant to go, but she finally got up because they were so persistent, and she sees a young man standing in front of the peephole, and then she sees another young man in the back that catches her heart. He has Johnny's eyes. He doesn't have Johnny's hair color, and there's a lot of things that look real different. His countenance didn't look like Johnny's, but those eyes, they were Johnny's. And when she lets him in, it's because of those eyes. And he tells her, I'm Johnny, and I'm alive. And these are all the things I've been through, and I do know Paul. But you've got to quit. You've got to stop what you're doing, because if you don't, when she was looking into the Franklin situation, if you don't stop rocking the boat and making waves, not only are you going to get me killed, you're going to get yourself killed. And she told him then, I don't care about my life. I've not cared about my life since the day you come up missing. And he said, Mom, I care about your life. I don't care about mine. I need you to live. I need you to keep doing what you're doing. Don't let another kid end up like me. But I need you to live.
And these people probably put him up to that. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I think Johnny begged to go. I think that they told him, we're going to kill her. We're going to do all these things. But later on, we'll learn Johnny's got some pull.
Manipulation and looming their bullying nature over the top of these kids to the point that,
Well, later on, we'll learn Johnny's got some pull. Johnny's got an ear to some big wigs. And I think that they were going to kill Noreen. And that it was going to get bad. And Johnny gets in that ear of the right person and he says, just let me go to her. I can make her be quiet. Don't hurt her. So he gets to go at 2:30 in the night in the cover of dark, and he gets to tell Noreen, shh, just be quiet. Everything you're saying is true. Everything you think is real. Just let it go. Keep fighting for the kids. Just leave me and Franklin out of it. And Noreen does. For a long time, Noreen is quiet. She does exactly as her son asked her to do. Regardless if that was Johnny or not, if someone would have just put someone that favored him up to it. Can you imagine? This person showing up on your doorstep at 2:30 in the morning telling you that your child who went missing in 1982, what is 1997? It's
15 years.
Wow. There he is. Even if it wasn't completely true, you'd want to believe it was true. And you'd be quiet. You'd keep fighting. You'd keep doing what you're doing. And Noreen was quiet. But it is during one of those cases where she's fighting for another child when a pissant of an attorney looks at her and says, well, have you talked to Johnny since he's been missing? And under oath, Noreen has to tell the truth. I think I have. I don't know, but I think I have. And she tells the story. And the press ate it up. And
So what spin did they put on this?
Nothing.
I mean,
she's a conspiracy theory. She's crazy.
Yeah.
They just add to that plot line. But of course, for poor Noreen, that wouldn't be the end. In 2005, she would be sitting in her home watching a press conference when a reporter would be asking soft questions of George Bush, when she would be caught again, completely off guard, and say, that's my son. That's not Jeff Gannon. That's Jonny Gosch. She did press that issue that time. In every video that Noreen ever did, it didn't matter if it was 2 days after he was missing or even 40 years. She did a video the other day on the 40th anniversary of Johnny being missing. She would turn and directly face the camera and she would say, Johnny, if you're still out there, I love you and I'm proud of you. And then when you get ready to come home, I'll protect you.
Yeah, he'd have never left that night. You know what I'm saying? Like, I couldn't even watch, him turn around and walk off into the darkness again, Like, y'all come on if you want. You know what I'm saying?
You got that right.
Yeah.
But she's alone. She's fighting alone.
Well, she obviously had metal beyond
You ain't kidding.
what, most people would consider absolutely unfathomable.
She is cut from a different cloth.
Absolutely. Like you said, I mean, people get discouraged over menial things.
Right.
And she is literally fighting a whole system with people that are in positions of power that were literally supposed to be the ones helping her. and they are doing everything that they can to cover it up, and they have the power to do so. And she keeps trudging along
She does.
with pieces of herself being ripped out of her at every turn, and even like you said, her husband. And wow.
Yeah. She endured. She sure did. But she
Again,
goes on.
ma'am, I salute you.
She goes on and presses the issue. She tells people, "That's my son." Um, Jeff Gannon had just become some type of online reporter for the Talon. He did not have press credentials, and he definitely did not qualify to be in that press conference with the president. When he would be pushed, he was on the Bill Maher show, he was on Nancy Grace. When he would be pushed, he would just say, "I don't know, I'm a reporter. I had a pass." It would go on to be revealed that Jeff Gannon had been at the White House no less than 36 times, even not during press conferences, and he seemed to always be in the background, if not in the forefront, asking those soft questions. And when they dug into his past, he was not a reporter. He was a male prostitute. He ran an online, or he worked for an online male escort service, which was fine. But Jeff would go on to be fired. He'd come out in January of 2005. In February of 2005, he was fired from the Talon. He would go on to write a couple of articles for other newspaper people, and they weren't like credible. Like, it wasn't Fox News, it wasn't the New York Post, it wasn't these type of things that he's
Like
writing articles
fringe
for.
agencies.
Right. Very fringe. He would go on to write about being ousted in the public as a reporter, which I don't think that was fair. Even if it was Jonny, I don't think it was fair for them to dig so much and reveal so much about him, especially not during that time. It wasn't a time that we were being as accepting as we are. So I'm sure that was hard for him, regardless if it was Jonny. But when he would go on the Bill Maher show and the Nancy Grace show, they would ask him, "Just do a DNA test. That's all you've got to do." And he would say, "Of course I'll do it, but I shouldn't have to, or I don't need to, or this is why." And when they would ask him, "Show us your chest." "Not going to do it." "Show us your tongue." "Absolutely not." He would go on to never do the DNA test. When Noreen was asked how she felt about how that all played out, she said, "I told y'all from the beginning. To me, I truly believe it's him. And if it is Jonny, I just have to let him live and be who he is and accept I'm never getting him back."
I sort of get it, like I said, that they continue to press it because there are people out there that still have not been brought to justice that could be, and probably is, still doing this to other kids. So, I mean, I get the fact that they would continue to press, not necessarily that they would blow his life up, but to, continue to press and say, look, there's got to be some truth brought to light here. We're living in a fantasy world, somebody else's fantasy world, about sweeping every bit of this up under the rug. I can't, like I said, I get it, why they would continue to press. Again.
Yeah. But, I mean, it doesn't matter how old Paul gets. It doesn't matter how old Jeff gets. They're never going to be free. They're never going to be in a position where they can say, "Yeah, Jeff Gannon is Jonny Gosch."
So, I mean, if they
Out
choose
loud,
to
publicly.
live, I mean, if they choose to live, then they have to live in the certain way that these people in power have set the parameters for.
Or you can be like Paul. You can be the fall guy. And you can state your story. It don't matter. If you screamed it to the top of your voice, nobody was going to believe Paul. Now, the other 80 victims that slowly got knocked off, that was involved in the Franklin scandal,
They wouldn't play ball?
they were believable. They were credible.
Oh, I'm saying they wouldn't play ball. They wouldn't they wouldn't live the way that Jonny Gosch was living. They wouldn't.
Well, they never
turn around and live that lie.
They no longer had the ability.
Is that
it had been
why they
it had
were
been
knocked
uncovered?
off?
Well, yeah, because it had been uncovered. They no longer had the ability to live in hiding. All of this got uncovered during this Franklin scandal, where this $40 million was embezzled.
And so instead of the people responsible, it was the victims that were silenced and were
the reporters, the investigators, anybody that brought attention to more than that $40 million embezzlement.
So
even the victim gone.
Is this something that we're past now? I mean, you guys, obviously, we're going to give our opinion, but would love to hear your opinion as well. Is this something that we're past now in this information age where we're able to come together as a community and pull up this information?
Be past human trafficking.
And again, a lot of these, I mean, are how much of the evidence still exists? I guess is
we will never be past human trafficking.
Well,
human trafficking makes more than the most sought after drug in America.
I mean, I can understand that, but what I'm getting at is, are we past, throwing people onto the scrap heap based upon their fringe theories? Like I said, I mean, to me, again, if the evidence is there, and that's why it becomes so huge for people to do their own research, to look for the things.
But it won't matter. I mean, even like the Franklin scandal, there's books about it. I mean, John DeCamp wrote a book. Nick Bryant wrote a book. All of the evidence is there. There's pictures. There's file after file after file of what happened there. And if you look it up, Snoops.com is going to tell you debunked. Facebook's going to tell you that's false information. YouTube may take this video down. It's not verifiable.
But what I'm getting at is, if the information, are there not enough private servers out there? Are there not enough? Do the citizens of, at the very least, the U.S. not have the resources to have private servers to keep these things? And again, we know that it's not our job, but it sort of is. If we live in a country where we are supposed to be free, where we
he just woke up.
No, it's my point is this. It's not that I want to live with my head in the sand. It's at the point when is it enough? When is it enough?
Waking up is not about having your head in the sand. Waking up is about not knowing what's going on and finally slipping down that rabbit hole. Really slipping down that rabbit hole and seeing the evidence sitting in front of you and knowing it's all going to be conspiracy. It's all going to be smoke and mirrors. And if you talk about it,
and that's my point. Theorist. Until it's not. Like I said, this community is obviously growing. It has been for a while.
Oh, there's a lot of woke people.
At what point do we, through obviously legal means, not trying to get people to go out and do, stupid crap and so forth and so on, but like you said, it's up to all that is necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. And that is the point right there.
But what
do we all live in a society where we're so worried about our comfort level that we're willing to let these things just continue to go by while we just smile and wave, boys? Just smile and wave.
Yes, we do, because the reach is so great. What do? Noreen had to self-publish her own book. Nobody would touch it. And when she would go on these talk shows, it was few and far in between. Like
how did she get the money to do that, though? I mean, I'm sure she had people that were backing her. I'm sure she had people, and that's what I'm saying. A community to reach out
conspiracy theory,
and
tin
help.
hat full wearing fools.
And until they're not. The the popular opinion is only the popular opinion until there's enough people that change their opinion that it's no longer the popular opinion, and that's where I'm at. Like I said,
Well,
I've never been the
there's
kind to
always
just sit back and say,
there's always going to be just enough shadow of a doubt to keep it conspiracy. What led us down this
Until there's
rabbit
not.
hole? The Delphi case.
Until
The
there's
Delphi
not.
case led me to the Evansdale case, which also led Noreen there. Once you go down the hole, you don't get out of it. Once you truly go down the hole and you view the evidence and you know in your heart that it's true, you'll look at every case this way. You'll look at Delphi and you'll say, there was a couple of high up connections with that Keegan Klein account. Were they going to human traffic Libby? And Abby ends up being there, so they have to now turn it into a film. Still make money, but not as much as human trafficking her. You'll start to think that way.
There's been a change in that case as well. There's been a
They now think that Ron Logan was a part of that case.
there we go.
A lot's going to come out there. Not all of it. Never identify the man behind the curtain. And they never will. Those higher up, I won't even say them. I'm not going to say them here.
We could.
Never identify the man behind the curtain. You don't have enough information on him. And even when you do, like, we could do shows on backdoor.com. It's a human trafficking site. Parents are telling people all day, every day, in their face, that's my daughter being human trafficked on backdoor.com. She's 12, she's 14. There's a rug being sold on Wayfinder. Wayfair. Sorry. We hang Wayfinders, so I do it every time. You'll look at every case. When you truly wake your eyes up and you know what's going on, you'll look at every case and you'll say,
No.
there it is.
But
There's the clue.
again, I've never been the defeatist, I guess. You
I'm
know
not
what
a
saying?
defeatist.
It's like,
I really wish
say-
there was something that they could do. I mean, but what do you do? Look how long it took them to get R. Kelly. I mean, he had a whole ring of girls and their parents screaming at the top of their lungs. He's got them. This is where they're at. Some of them are super underage. There's video evidence of his nasty. Nothing.
I mean, it's even in
The
you know,
Me
other
Too
people's
movement
songs.
got that going.
You know, his debauchery is even in other people's songs to the point that it's become such common knowledge that it's put out there to be, what was it? I'm gonna pop some tags. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
We all know the line, and it just goes on, which is
I don't
absolutely
think
frustrating.
without the Me Too movement that would have gotten very much movement. He had gotten by with that for years. A 13-year-old child was shown on video. Nothing.
But it all boils down to one thing, and that is money, power. But again, there's power in numbers.
There could be if you had enough numbers.
That's my point, and that's why we have, you know, the rights that we have as American citizens. You know what I'm saying? To, you know, the right to bear arms, the right to freedom of speech, and all of these things, and they are under attack. That's a given. And
But
I
do you
think
have that right, or is it an illusion of a right?
That's the problem, is that as long as you allow it to be an illusion of a right, then that's exactly what it is. But once you take ownership of that right, it becomes something completely different. And that's where, to me, the open-mindedness and all of the, I think that, again, the political realm has turned everything so political that if you are, for this, then you're put into this basket. If you're for that, you're put into this basket. If you're for this, then you're, and all that is, the medias and, social medias and things of that nature, doing whatever they can to say, look over here, look over there, look over here. Again, when do we stop putting people into boxes and looking at people as individuals and saying, you know what, this individual may be crazy, but I need to find the evidence that proves that before I throw them in this box. I need to find the evidence that they are telling the truth before, I go all in. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of, just because you see it in your, feed, 5 or 6 times, oh, that must be true. You know what I'm saying? Instead of, it's,
In this case, you didn't have a balance. Paul Benassi was equal parts, seemed to be telling some truths and equal parts crazy. I mean, even if he didn't have DID, what he was saying about being flown around the world to hire up political people, one of those being a president, people are not going to believe that.
but how easy is it to look
Tunnels
at the evidence?
under the White House is not going to be believed. You know what I mean?
How hard is it to look at evidence versus pre-made judgments? You know what I'm saying? Look at how much alien, people, outer space, UFO enthusiasts, and so forth and so on had gone through. And one of my favorite channels, the Y-Files. This guy with Hecklefish, he's a genius. The way that he brings the things on and he presents the case in its entirety with information that he has found. And then, toward the end of the video, he says, all right, now how much of this can be debunked? That's the way that we need to look at everything. Right. And that's the point. You know what I'm saying? I guess I'm the type of person that believes nothing's impossible. Given the
start talking about things of this nature, it's already been said that it's conspiracy so long. It's conspiracy.
Until it's not.
Until it's not. And it's just really hard to prove that it's not. And it's really hard for people like Noreen. I cannot imagine being in her shoes, being called crazy, being told that you're just conspiracies and this is all lunacy and you just need to stop. And they're trying to shut her down while she's full-fledged just trying to help.
And that's where I'm at with the Noreens and Jamarian Crosby's mom and all of these parents, obviously, and obviously the children as well. But like I said, in a lot of these cases, the children are no longer with us. And so simply for the fact of the family, I don't know, man. All I got to say is, bring back the heroes of old, people who stood for right because it was right, those who were willing to, face the guillotine for their principles, for, what is it they say? We started out with nothing. We still got most of it left. How many of you people are in that same situation, and yet you let these things pass you by because you're afraid to lose, some, creature comfort that you have. And like I said, I'm not removing myself as one of these people, because obviously I am. And that's what's so frustrating, is that when you look at these things and you say, you know, if this is true, which again can be proven, one way or the other, if this is true, then this needs to happen. And if it is, a long amount of time, like I said, we just, how many of you grind every day for everything that you make? You know what I'm saying? And yet you feel as though it can be taken away from you if you don't follow the crowd, if you don't turn a blind eye to. And again, I'm not saying that I am exempt from this observation. We talked about it before, the prisoner's paradox. You know what I'm saying?
I think it's just, these cases, it's like Jeffrey Epstein. It's like the Ghislaine Maxwell case. You're not going to see resolution fully. You may get some justice. You may get half a story. You're not going to get it all. In my opinion, you're not going to get it all.
Well, I mean, we're an hour and 15 into this, and I think we've kicked this dead dog. But I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed this episode, and that's what we hope to do here on this channel, is to make people think, and hopefully in some way, make a difference. We're just getting into this. It's something that we have, literally, this will be the 5th video, right?
We actually started doing it just to spend time together, doing something that we enjoy.
Absolutely.
If other people, listen and enjoy it, that's great. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
We were talking about going to Lithonia for work soon. We were going to just go by the crime scene for Debbie Collier. No, we hadn't been on a lot of updates there, but Jeffrey her son had brought up a good, question in his post. Was that even my mom there at that Family Dollar that day? Would love to go and just talk to that cashier and see what she says. Does she think that it was Debbie? Is it possible it might not have been Debbie, that it could have been someone trying to look like Debbie?
Yeah. See if we can locate the crime scene and I don't know, take a wide angle shot. I mean, are there things
There's just a lot that was left there that I would like to see.
Yeah. Are there things that you guys and gals would like to see, that, you're like, hey, if I had this, bit of information, and obviously, we can't pull information that we don't have, but again, if it's something, physically at the crime scene, or, anything that we can do, saying while we're there. So, let us be your legs, in this case.
Or if you just want to see it, because we're definitely going anyway, because I have so many questions. They've left so much there. I want to see how close that rehab is. A lot of people say it's super close. I want to see if I can see a connection from what I'm looking at. Riding that road, seeing why I think she may have been there. And if you guys want to tag along, we'll share it with you. Just let us know. But we'll jump off of here since we've been going for quite a minute.
Well, thanks to everybody who came by and commented and subscribed. We'd love to see some more of you subscribe. Like I said, we want to, know how many people that we're reaching, and we will get to the comments. Again, this is, something that we do on the side. We had to take a break to go down to St. Mary's, and we do interior signs and major retail chains, and that's our family business. So we have to travel, and usually we travel together. We weren't able to here. We had different things we had to do here and there. So again, we weren't together to make the video, and it's something that we always want to try to do, is to make this about, her and I, spending time together, and it being the both of us instead of, splitting up. So like I said, that's why we haven't posted in a while, and also why we hadn't gotten to all the comments. But again, we don't want you to think that they're not important to us. Each and every one, like we said at the opening, Some of them were very funny. We enjoyed all of them, even the ones that were critiquing us, giving us, because I honestly think none of it was said out of malice. I think all of it was said as, hey, you know what, let us show you or tell you what we have seen, that you guys can improve upon. And again, we actually got the microphone, but I didn't plug it in until about 5-6 minutes into the video. But we're getting there, and so like I said, guys, we really do appreciate you. Share us with people that that would be interested in seeing it as well. Again, we want to reach as many people as we can, and want to hear from you all as well. So anything that we can do to help out, just let us know. But until next time, let's talk about it. Clark with Chad
And Tiffany.
See you later.
Bye, guys.